Alright, it's been more than 6 months now since Fallout 76 dropped, and I figured that since I'm one of the few guys on YouTube just goofing around and having fun with it, I'd make a video with my thoughts thus far. No, this isn't gonna be just another absolute copy-paste roast of the game cause it's easy views. When I talk about a game, I give my own personal opinions both from a content creator's and genuine player standpoint. Yes, I do play this game off stream and don't always record everything I do. At this point, I've put around 300 or so hours into the game. I make sure to try every little bit of new content they add into it, as well as break it horrendously. So with that being said, I'm going to talk about a couple key things I believe need to be discussed as the game continues to further in content. Performance-wise, the game has improved massively. I mean, I can't even begin to describe how many graphic changes have been made to actually make this feel good, instead of breaking the immersion with crappy god rays or awful textured areas. It seems like they really narrowed it down to what we complained about, quite loudly, and have now a pretty good looking game. Now it should be noted that there are still some definite graphical bugs and flaws that hover about, like incredibly awful performance drops when you're in certain areas, and sometimes you don't get things spawning in with you, which is being a bit nitpicky, but it can be frustrating having to wait for things to appear before you can use them. Now, where I really think this game has fallen short for me, personally, is difficulty. I understand, if you're new, you've got no guns, and it's difficult to build up a character. But now for the end game folks, the part of the game where every player is eventually going to end up, it feels empty. Side quests, daily quests, they kind of just appear in your journal, and half the time it's better to just grind areas for loot and caps and then buy the quest items from fellow players. And I wasn't bothered by this as much as others were. I'm not gonna lie, an NPC-less world without proper endgame feels bland. You can only farm the queen so many times before you just get absolutely bored out of your mind. All of the good grinding and farming locations are usually swarmed by the other endgame players, and the worst part is that this incredibly gorgeous open world is split into sections for certain leveled players. Way back when, I understood that MMOs did this to create a grind, but this world, this 4 times larger than Fallout 4 world, is not big enough for both beginner and endgame players. It's just not. There's not really any big reason to go back to that side of the map unless there's a small quest that gets you to do so, or maybe a resource that you need to grind for. This is hands down the game's greatest shortcoming at the moment. You'll wonder why they decided to do a non-level scaling system on a map that is so incredibly condensed without really catering to the end game challenge that most players seek. It gets repetitive and bland. You go to West Tech, you kill the guys, you hope for legendaries, you go home. You drop off your stuff, you go to White Springs, you kill the ghouls, you hope for legendaries, you go home, you drop off your stuff. It's just a repetitive cycle. Even dropping a nuke is now easy. It can be simply soloed by any one person. Plus, nuking really doesn't sell this game anymore. It was amazing at first, but then they nerfed nuke areas, made the queen practically the only understandable place to nuke, and if you nuke anywhere else, well, you'll get a trickle of enemies, and then you'll leave the nuke there for 3 hours and no one goes in. Something that has been great for this game is endgame events that they've added in. These events are finally difficult enough for players to head in with a big group, complete a larger task, end with a great big boss fight, and then take off. Now these events usually take around 5 to 10 minutes to fully complete, are a great source of resources, XP, and legendaries, but there's still one thing that falls short. People. These events are great for the first week, everyone is there. But after that, it just dies down, and you get left trying to solo and eventually abandoning these quests. Feels like a lot of effort for an event that will just get forgotten or ignored. These events either need to have more incentive to actually go do them, or much like everything else, they will become a waste of time. It really bothers me that the game is finally at a point where crashes are close to never, drastic texture and graphic changes have been made, and a bunch of new content has been added, but to a point where it still comes across as feeling a bit empty. Now, as great as they've been doing with the patching and increasing the performance of the game, content-wise, you can't just update the game every other week with a new beast or something, hoping players will stick around for months. It gets bland. This game has enough content to easily fill up 100 hours of your time, but after that, you find yourself just really wanting more. which is a good thing, I suppose. It's captivating and entertaining, but the questing itself feels non-existent. It's just repetitive grinds for better gear to then use that better gear to grind for better gear. It's not a great cycle. You know what? Despite all of this, I'm actually really looking forward to these new dungeons that they have planned. Actual dungeons. Content that will no doubt introduce a new gameplay style of mechanics and purpose in the game, whereas right now, we're kind of just stuck with a pretty mediocre grind that is way too easy for endgame players. So then why have I stuck around this long and just not moved on? Because the game is obviously ramping up greatly, and I need to give them props for that, because the game is genuinely fun to play. The combat is fantastic, the excitement for good legendaries is still there, the exploration is great, and most importantly, a ton of the bugs have been dealt with. There's always a certain charm that brings you back into playing. We just have to hope that in the future, they're gonna introduce mechanic-driven, challenging content. Hopefully some form of human AI. Just anybody, please. A larger world to expand into, rather than feeling limited in a non-scaled world. And lastly, more reason for players to engage in their endgame events. While Appalachia was fun, but it felt more like a test as to what they can do and introduce things without breaking uncontrollably. Now, I'm not going to be the first to tell you that no game company should ever release a quote-unquote full game without extensively testing it for months upon months in advance. Fallout 76, for being a totally online-driven experience, had a short and pathetic testing trial period, which ultimately, if they had delayed the game a bit further and allowed players to really push the game, it would have launched a lot better. And now finally arriving at a good place, I'm sorry, 6 months is just too long to have been a fixing period. With the competition of other game companies being so aggressive right now, I'm not sure if Fallout 76 will ever have the audience that it could have once had if there was a smooth launch. But hopefully, they can entertain the audience they have right now, and begin to create a more welcoming setting for those critical players to want to engage in. Anywho, no, Fallout 76 is not a steaming pile of trash like half of the comments I get say it is. If you put the game down months ago, or you haven't played it at all, and you continue to slam this game because you're either stuck in the past, or because some incredibly critical view-hungry content creator says so because they need to SLI their 2080 Ti, break away from that negativity and go in like you've never seen this game before. It'll be a much different experience.